Moments ago, President Trump shared fresh details from his 2-hour call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. That call happened yesterday, and the president's hope for a quick end to Russia's war in Ukraine seems to have faded.
But sometimes you see two young children fighting like crazy. They hate each other and they're fighting in a park. And you try and pull them apart. They don't want to be pulled. Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart. And I gave that analogy to Putin yesterday. I said, President, maybe you're going to have to keep fighting and suffering a lot because both sides are suffering before you pull them apart, before they're able to be pulled apart.
My panel is back, and I just want to say, Kylie, what happened after that. He said, you see it as hockey. You see it in hockey. Maybe that's a negative because we're saying, go.
He is effectively saying here that it's okay for them to keep fighting, that he expects that that's going to be the case. We're so far away from the early days of the administration where he was continually promising that this conflict was going to come to a resolution, and it was all because of him. And one of the other things that he went on to say in the Oval Office was that there's going to be additional fighting after that Ukrainian strike deep inside Russia over the weekend, that drone strike that took out some really key military targets on Russia's behalf. He effectively said that he told Russia not to do it, but he didn't say that there would be any implications for Russia, any cost that would be associated with them fighting back. So we're really at a different place in this conflict right now, and it's clear that the White House is getting further and further away from any idea that a ceasefire is in the near term.
He didn't even indicate in that statement yesterday whether he pushed back on Putin when he said that he would retaliate for Ukraine's attacks. Increasingly, there seems to be a pattern here where the president talks about the war in Ukraine as if he's a neutral observer and stepped away, almost a commentator of these things, and not somebody who argued that he could use his, quote, very, very good relationship with Vladimir Putin to convince him to actually come to the table to ensure peace, right? The U.S. is a player here. The Trump administration has a role here in these negotiations, but increasingly you have the president acting as if he has some distance from it.
Not even neutral party. I think he's actively distancing himself. I mean, he's saying this has nothing to do with me. This is Zelensky's war. This is Putin's war. This is Joe Biden's war. At one point, he said that. I mean, he is making it clear he doesn't want to be there. I mean, they didn't send a representative from the United States to the talks between Russia and Ukraine on purpose because he wants to say they're dealing with this directly. I'm done here.
But is that
So
because...
I think that was the astute point that you made. That is a deliberate effort, right? I mean, he comes in on the campaign trail. He says, we're going to do this day one. Okay, that obviously doesn't happen. No one really thought it was going to happen on day one, but that's what he said. Those were his words, right? And then he realizes, okay, we're not going to be able to do this. His piece, Steve Witkoff, goes over, has all these meetings, and realizes they're really far apart. He talks to donors, Trump does at his club, and he says, Putin wants all the land. I don't know what's happened to this guy, right? He has this blow up with Zelensky. And then he realizes, okay, Putin's maybe a bigger problem here than Zelensky is, that he sends Witkoff back over. It's not going anywhere. So what does he say? Okay, now it's you guys to solve it. I'm stepping back from this because he realized this was not going anywhere quickly, right? And so he had to extract himself. And now his administration frames it as a win privately when the two sides just sit down at the table and the U.S. isn't there. We got them to talk. That's all we really needed to do. I mean, this was a moving of the goalposts that was strategic, deliberate, and over time, because the president realized he was getting increasingly frustrated with this war and realized he was not going to be able to do what he said he was going to do on the campaign trail.
And what happened to Vladimir Putin is nothing. Vladimir Putin is the same today that he was all of those times that President Trump made the promise he was going to end the war on day one, because he's been the same guy for decades since he came back into power, you know, however many, I guess, 2 decades ago, effectively saying, I want to restore Mother Russia. And that includes, first and foremost, taking over Ukraine. It's his goal. It always has been.
And Trump is consistently asked about new sanctions on Russia, and he consistently flip-flops. You know, one day he'll say maybe, the other day he'll say not right now. Today he effectively said it was some, you know, elusive marker in his mind over when those sanctions would go into place. So there really is no cost on Russia right now. And the backdrop being that the conversations that the administration has had with Russia have focused on doing business deals between the United States and Russia.
President Trump is sharing new details about what he says was a more than 2-hour phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday.
Trump told reporters that during the call, he compared the ongoing war, which of course resulted from Russia's full-scale invasion, to 2 children fighting in a park. Listen to his description.
Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart. And I gave that analogy to Putin yesterday. I said, President, maybe you're going to have to keep fighting and suffering a lot because both sides are suffering before you pull them apart, before they're able to be pulled apart. And he actually told me, I mean, I made it very clear. He said, we have no choice but to attack based on that. And it's probably not going to be pretty. I don't like it. I said, don't do it. You shouldn't do it. You should stop it. But again, there's a lot of hatred.
Joining us now, CNN Global Affairs analyst Kimberly Dozier. And I wonder, let's focus for a moment on Ukraine's reaction. How kindly will Ukrainians take to a war that they see as existential? They're fighting for the existence of their country from an ongoing Russian invasion to absorb Ukraine into Russia, and they've lost many hundreds of thousands of people, to being compared to 2 kids fighting in the playground.
I went straight to Telegram message boards where Ukrainians post news and react to it, and there were a lot of heads exploding emojis, flames, angry faces, just one gauge of how they just don't understand why Trump keeps siding with Putin. That he doesn't seem to understand that their civilians are under constant attack. They have apps on their phones that go off several times a day, telling them to head to bomb shelters. And this has been going on and on and on. 7,000 people, troops dying a week, and that's just on the Russian side, according to the British Ministry of Defense. And yet, Trump seems like he's stepping back like some sort of outsider or referee and said, this is not about me.
Right.
You guys, you got to stop this. You're doing this because you hate each other.
Right, and I think he said you have to let him fight it out for a while, was what he said too. I'm curious what you thought about the interaction with the German chancellor, who would try to kind of pull it back when he had the opportunity there in the Oval Office to try to find ways where he could speak to Trump on where they were united and how they were trying to bring this war to an end. But it was interesting to watch that dynamic play out.
Well, the existential threat right now that the Europeans and the Ukrainians fear is that Trump will just walk away, wash his hands of it, and not just stop diplomatic efforts to end this conflict, but take away the intelligence, take away weaponry, the supplies that are at this point keeping Ukraine in the fight, and that Europe is not yet ready to replace. Their industry hasn't ramped up enough. Ukraine has this amazing defense industry, but they're pumping out drones. Russia has been pumping out 1,500 new tanks a year. They've replenished much of their stocks of supplies that they'd gone through in the first year. China's helping them. North Korea's helping them. They're now stockpiling while Ukraine is just barely keeping in the fight.
Ukraine did show with this massive drone strike over the weekend what they could do on their own, because they did it without U.S. intelligence. They deliberately did not inform the U.S. prior. They did it with Ukrainian developed and manufactured drones and struck a strategic blow against Russia. If the U.S. were to withdraw intelligence support and other kinds of support, where would Ukraine feel it most? And I'm thinking air defenses. That's what they always express concern about.
The Patriot missile supplies, for instance, are running out. They would feel it most in defending their civilian areas. They have sent a lot of their radars to protect military installations. They don't have enough to protect civilian cities. Ukraine is a massive country, so if the U.S. would withdraw its support, they could stay in the fight on the front lines for a time, but they would have to eventually give up some territory at the front lines and fall back to protecting some of those cities, because they wouldn't have the U.S. eyes in the sky telling them where the Russian troop movements are and where the ballistic missiles, et cetera, are being fired from and aiming for.
Yeah, it's so important because the intelligence is not just about offensive capabilities, it's about defensive capabilities. And I think folks sometimes forget that. Kimberly Dozier, thanks so much.
Thanks.